Hi Sloths, and welcome back to Unpopular Opinions, the series where last time I actually managed to piss off most of the internet. Now, in today's episode we've got Sonic Lost Worlds, and I'm going to be telling you the negatives and the positives, why people hate this game, and why some people actually quite like this game, or at least believe it, like me, to be kind of mediocre. I honestly do not believe that this game should have as much berating as it already has. I think it actually deserves at least a little bit more praise, a little less hate than what people are currently giving it. So, without further ado, let's get into the negatives of Sonic Lost Worlds. So, first of all, I want to talk about the new wisps. Anyway, the new wisps and how terrible they are. So, I'm going to agree the new wisps, kind of useless. So, we've got the indigo, crimson, magenta, ivory, black and grey wisps. So, first of all, the indigo wisp transforms Sonic into his indigo asteroid colour power form, which is basically where Sonic absorbs his surroundings and then converts those surroundings into energy to basically make him jump higher and then hover slowly toward the ground in this sort of like asteroid sort of form. So the point of this is basically mostly to just access hidden areas for a red ring, and it's only used in 2D sections. Now this would be great if this was used a little bit better than just accessing red rings. Sure, red rings are kind of important collectibles if you want to go for 100%, or if you want, the Supersonic, which is kind of just like mediocre in this game as well. The entire game is just mediocre. I'm just going to throw that out there now. The other like main problem with this is that this literally makes Sonic slower. His hover and his jumping, it's just more floaty and more slow. That is it. And in a game where this is, well, in a Sonic game, the entire point is to go fast. So what you'll actually notice about these colour power-ups is that they don't make Sonic go fast. They all make Sonic go slow. Well, except from kind of one, but we'll get into that later. So, the next one, Crimson Eagle. The Crimson Wisp grants Crimson Eagle, should I say, which basically allows Sonic to fly. Or so they claim. Although it seems kinda like Sonic just glides slowly and loses altitude instead of actually flying. Basically it's useless. It's a slow gliding power-up that doesn't even travel very far. And like I said, you can see the theme here of Sonic being slowed down in a game where Sonic is the main character, so kinda need fast gameplay. That's the entire point of Sonic, to go fast. Now, next up is the Magenta Wisp, which grants Magenta Rhythm. So this is a colour power that allows Sonic to basically jump mid-air, which is pointless because in the previous game, the game that this kind of continues on from, Sonic Colors, basically has Sonic having an actual double jump in his natural moveset. So that's kind of pointless, the fact that now they've taken away something that was part of his natural moveset and given it to him in the form of a power-up, which is kind of useless because it only happens like a couple of times in the game where you actually need this thing to traverse large gaps. And that's kind of like its only use. There's no like use for it to jump up quite high or anything like that. Nope. Just traverse large gaps. So, there's no actual rhythm despite its name, and you don't like have to jump or press the jump button like at any like specific time. There's no rhythm to it. You don't have to do it in time with the sound or the music or sound effects or anything like that. You don't even have to use it on specifically like the music notes that appear during this time. Again, it's pointless, it's useless. No one really cares about it. Next up is the Ivory Wisp, which grants Ivory Lightning. Now this one is the only one that kind of makes Sonic go fast, so Ivory Lightning basically turns Sonic into this electrical being. In this state, he is very slow, again. However, once Sonic reaches one of the metal coils that are dotted around the level, he can then, like, really quickly or almost instantaneously, like, zap between them. This is used so rarely, it's just kind of pointless for this actually being any kind of power-up. So, what else does this do? Can use electrical power to either instantly destroy or do heavy damage to enemies, but I guess you kind of don't need that because not only is there rarely a load of enemies in one spot, there's also kind of like, you know, the regular homing attack and the kick which deals, you know, it basically deals with them just as fast, if not, maybe even a little bit faster sometimes, who knows. Then comes the Black Wisp, which basically has the power of Black Bomb, turning Sonic into a large bomb. I've just said bomb like 4 times. YouTube's probably gonna not be happy with me after saying that. Anyway, it's like this one-time explosive that you can basically take into a level with you. So the explosion is like this largest range, which basically destroys like a small area of enemies. It's rarely actually helpful, and because it's something that you take into a stage with you, and it doesn't exactly tell you what button to press to actually activate it, I know, stupid, we'll get into that later as well. Basically, it's just rarely helpful and you'll forget that it's even there. Now, the last one is the Grey Wisp, which grants Grey Quake. This basically turns Sonic into this small iron ball. Again, it's slow, and that causes shockwaves that damage nearby enemies, but can only be used in the multiplayer of like the Steam and Wii U releases, but in the 3DS release, it's used more commonly in the actual main game itself. In conclusion, the new Wisps mostly useless and only appear in a few levels that actually demand, you know, this one-time unique-ish power-up. That's it. Speaking of levels, gimmick levels. They are few and far between, probably for the better. They kinda don't really play very well, so there's 2 of them, mainly. The skydiving level, that doesn't work great with like this overhead, almost isometric view. Because of that and the lack of like clear visibility of Sonic's shadow, it can result in either landing in the wrong place or missing the ground entirely. That has happened to me, I'm not proud to admit it. Maybe it's just a skill issue, I don't know, but it's just, you can't get a good grasp of where Sonic's gonna land, basically. Then there's the snowball level. Now that controls kind of awkwardly, and it also has some really terrible enemy placements, which I label as dick moves, basically. But more on the snowball level a little bit later because I have something else to add to that in a different section. Now, the thing that people hate probably either the most or the second most is the story and the villains. Now they are kind of terrible. Each villain basically represents some form of biblical sin, such as greed, envy and wrath. The most notable and obvious of these is the orange one. That, like, all of these characters' personalities are basically just their sin. That's it. So the one to easily, like, assess is the orange guy. I don't remember his name. He basically is the embodiment of greed, where all he thinks about really is food, eating, and he's always seen eating like either really long or large items or just eating a lot in general. And his entire personality is, I'm gonna eat that, yeah. And he even talks about eating Sonic and all sorts. It's just kind of gross and strange, and it's just boring because none of them really have anything interesting to say or to actually add to the story. You could replace these guys with any other villains, any other generic villains, and it'll basically play the exact same story. So, The villains, like, they have this simplistic Play-Doh-like designs. They look kind of plasticky, but they also look really squishy as well at the same time. Which, you know, might not be a bad thing if you kind of understand the actual design of the characters, and also the design of, like, the actual style and the models and stuff. But we'll get into that later on as well. So, what actually is the story? Well, it's kind of nonsense. It's boring nonsense, basically. So, the story basically goes that Eggman is using a mystical item to control a race of 6 demon-like entities called the Zeti on this planet called the Lost Hex. So, Sonic gets rid of the iron to try and save the Zeti from Eggman's control, but then the Zeti basically turn on both Sonic and Eggman. They try working together, but Tails and Eggman are at odds, and Tails actually thinks Sonic trusts Eggman more than him, which is one of the most outrageously bizarre and strange things that I think has ever come out of the Sonic franchise, to be honest. It truly is very odd. So, this argument basically leads to Tails being captured because he's kind of, you know, like, sidetracked completely. It is supposed to be Sonic who was supposed to be, like, captured. He was the original target, but they got Tails instead for whatever reason. Also, Eggman had made a Doomsday device that he was using to take energy from the actual Lost Hex, and can basically take the energy of entire worlds to power other weapons, machines and robots, as well as the Zeti, and just, yeah. The Zeti basically know how to use this because they have been working with Eggman, and Eggman basically showed them how it works, and because of the whole retaliation thing, the Zeti are now using the machine basically to steal power from Sonic's world and then infuse it into themselves. So, with all that, they're actually still an absolute pushover, and the boss fights are just really boring and easy. So, yeah. The other thing that people really don't like is the level design and the parkour. So, they've got this sort of like tubular or like cylindrical level design, which kind of feels out of place and looks a bit like a mess because it's just cluttered with so much rubbish, basically. There are branching pathways, but it's not like a simple tell to know where each of them are going to lead to, and in the end, most of them just lead to the same area anyway. In traditional Sonic games, they do this a lot better. They have 3 pathways. You can either go up, down, or through the middle, to the right, and you will get like really cool, unique pathways out of that. And yes, they all do sort of like converge on the same end goal, but at least they are just really well designed, usually, should I say. So, yeah. Basically, some of them can actually take you to like different sections where you can get loads of rings, a red ring maybe. That only happens a few times, I think, which is nice, except from the game's kinda really easy to play, so you don't really see yourself dying a lot and needing a lot of rings. So yeah, the only time it's actually hard are when you're trying outright to get the red rings and you are failing miserably, basically. We'll get into that a bit later as well. So, the parkour, it's not really used to its full potential, in my opinion. There's such a lack of explanations and tutorials. Basically, there is none, and that makes learning the controls properly feel very difficult, and you're constantly doing this trial and error, which just often results in this really annoying set of pointless dying. The controls as well for the parkour sometimes just don't seem to work. I've even still had issues where I'm running across the wall, I'm doing it properly, doing it exactly how it's intended, how all the guides say to do it, and then for some reason I'd just be constantly plummeting for seemingly no reason. Maybe I'm terrible at the game, maybe the game just is broken with the parkour. Also, just to add on to this, I know this is not a problem for everyone, but for me, I experienced something quite terrible. So I was in the jungle level, and if you already have played this game or have seen Let's Plays of it, or, you know, whatever, just seen this level in general, you will know that there are giant spider robots. Now this game looks really, really good, and it's well made with its models. So when you see something that's very spidery in a game like this, it makes it very difficult to play with your eyes open. How I managed to get past that, I still have no idea. So the last thing I want to touch on for the negatives is speed and physics. Now Sonic's speed is really slowed down, it's horribly slow. So maybe it's to simulate the fact that Sonic is supposed to be like running across an entire planet, but it just feels so sluggish, which doesn't work for Sonic at all. And Sonic has actually like a dedicated run button. So you've got to be running, like holding this run button down the entire game just to have this sort of like decent pace or momentum. And it's like the only time you actually get any momentum, even though it's not great. And even while running, it still feels a little bit slow. The spin dash also basically doesn't carry much momentum or speed, so even whilst you're doing that, you don't go very far and you don't go very fast doing it. Now lastly, Sonic's physics, they just feel a little bit floaty, so when it comes to like the controls while performing any of the parkour sort of moves, or when he's using like the homing attacks or the kicks, he just feels really floaty and slow and sluggish, and it's gross, because that is not how it should be in a Sonic game. We've already gone through all the negatives. I think it's time that we touched on the positives. Why do I actually kind of think this game's mediocre to decent-ish? So first off, I want to talk about the music and the sound effects. So Sonic soundtracks are usually very memorable, and although this one isn't as memorable as some of the others, the soundtrack is still beautiful, even going as far to have like these altered renditions or altered versions of music from different levels in the same area. So in classic Sonic games, basically what they would do is, the first act, they'll have the main song. Second act, they'll have a slightly altered version of it. Here, they do the same thing, but because it's like this symphonic sort of soundtrack, they do it in like a much more altered version. So the first act, main song. Second act, quite an altered but still very realistically part of that sound sort of new song, and it's just it's pretty good. It's pretty good. And the sound effects, they may have been taken from other games, but they're all sounds that we recognise and love anyway, so I guess if it's not broken, don't fix it. Next thing I want to quickly talk about is the graphics, the textures, and the scenery. Although the art style is very bright and simplistic, there's a certain charm in having little detail, and it still works well with the established design of the core cast, and even the new cast of like Bozzetti. It looks beautiful, and I can't fault it for that. It's very well modelled. Games do not have to have hyper-realism. I'm looking at you, Minecraft shaders, because I'm sick of seeing you all the time. Anyway, a little bit off topic there. Games don't have to be hyper-realistic to look beautiful. And this really, really shows in this game, and I think it's brilliant that they've done that. So, it's not too bright, it's not too saturated, it's just right. On the Wii U, the game is stuck to 1080p, and it looked very good. But I'm playing the Steam version, which you can use to improve the quality of the textures and the lighting, and the game just looks beautiful for that. Whether it's in a cutscene, on the world map, or in actual levels, everything looks really pretty and well designed. like not even seen any like visual issues of like X-ray glitches or visual tearing. Which brings me on to glitches. There is none. So sure, the physics and controls are pretty bad sometimes, but I've hardly come across an actual single glitch, whether it be gameplay or visual. There just isn't any. Maybe I've not encountered them, but it feels like they put plenty of effort into trying to make this game play well. Even if it didn't work out the way they'd hoped, it definitely feels like they put effort into making sure this is not a super buggy experience. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is probably the thing that kept me playing. That is Dr. Eggman. I know. Eggman is often seen as this goofy, incredibly silly character these days. So back in ye olden days, he may not have been, as goofy, as silly. But you can still tell he had this eccentricity to him. And he still kind of does. But throughout this entire game, he feels and acts like an actual villain, which is wild. Because everyone else around him is cracking jokes and being their usual silly selves. Even Vezetti, even Cubot and Orbot are messing around. This might all feel kind of out of place for some of those people who have come to accept Eggman for his wacky nature, but he feels genuinely evil and serious and cold-hearted. And it's brilliant that way. He even makes a lot of sense when he's interacting with Sonic and Tails. The things he's saying actually make sense for the situation. Rather than if it was like any other game, Eggman will be constantly just at odds with Sonic, and Sonic will constantly be at odds with Eggman. But this situation seems serious enough to both Sonic and Eggman that they are not only working together to try and stop Vezetti, but they're actually doing it in a more serious and realistic manner. And I just think that's really cool to see. Tails had none of it though. Tails really had none of it. Anyway, while everyone else is making fun of the situation, Eggman is being absolutely serious. And he's so genuinely cruel and evil and really seriously pissed off at Vezetti. And it's just refreshing to see him being so genuine for a change. Now, with all that out of the way, I think it's up to you guys to decide for yourselves whether this game is absolutely atrocious or borderline mediocre. Now, like I've said time and time before throughout this video, I believe that this game shouldn't be deserving as much hate as it gets. If you've never played or seen this game, I do recommend maybe not actually buying it. But if you have a copy or you know someone who has a copy, try it for yourself. Even if it's on Steam, even if you're asking for games for your birthday or Christmas or whatever, maybe just ask to add this game on at the end. And maybe you'll try it, and maybe you'll find your own little detail like I have found mine in Eggman that makes you actually play through the entire game. Maybe you'll know and understand. Maybe you'll absolutely hate the game. Maybe you already know that you hate the game. Maybe you've seen this video trying to figure out why other people like this game when you have such a negative opinion about it. And you've already played it, you've already experienced how bad in your eyes this game can be. But maybe there's just these little bits, little memorable bits that you've gone through throughout the entire game that make you feel like maybe it's not as bad as I'm thinking. Maybe, just maybe, this game deserves a chance. I feel like if Sega was to make another game like this, they might actually get it right. It's been long enough now, and they've been listening to the fans for years. So maybe if I listen about this one, the next time they make a game with a similar sort of premise to this, whether it be a remake of this, a prequel, a sequel, anything, or maybe even a new experience entirely using these sorts of mechanics. I mean, hell, I've not played Sonic Frontier and I hear that's got plenty of parkour in it. And I don't know if that turned out any good. So maybe they've already taken this advice and made something incredible. But if they haven't, maybe this time I can actually get it perfect. Or at least right. As good as right as they can. Anyway, with all that being said, please like and subscribe, it's always free, and I'll see you later.